A homeless carpenter from Nazareth walks dusty roads preaching to fishermen and tax collectors about loving your enemies. Fast forward 2,000 years and his followers own golden thrones, private jets, and billion-dollar empires. One of them just bought a fourth mansion while asking for donations to spread God's word. How did we get here? How did a movement that began with a man who had nowhere to lay his head transform into one of history's most powerful institutions? The story you're about to hear contains more plot twists than a Hollywood thriller, more political intrigue than Game of Thrones, and more shocking reversals than any soap opera ever written. It starts with blood in the sand of Roman arenas, where Christians were fed to lions for entertainment. But within 3 centuries, those same Christians would be sitting on Caesar's throne, deciding who lived and who died. This isn't just a story about religion. It's a story about power, corruption, redemption, and the most dramatic institutional transformation in human history. The year is 64 AD. Rome is burning, and Emperor Nero needs someone to blame. He points his finger at a strange new cult that worships a crucified Jewish carpenter. As Christians are dragged from their homes, dipped in tar, and set ablaze to light Nero's gardens, none of them could have imagined that their great-great-grandchildren would one day rule the very empire that was murdering them. Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, is being crucified upside down because he doesn't feel worthy to die the same way as his master. As the nails pierce his flesh, Roman soldiers mock him. "Where is your kingdom now?" Peter doesn't know it, but his answer would shock those soldiers. The kingdom is coming, and it will arrive wearing Caesar's crown. For 3 centuries, being a Christian was essentially a death sentence. They met in secret in catacombs beneath the city, painting fish symbols on walls as coded messages. The fish wasn't just a cute symbol, it was a survival tool. When a Christian met a stranger, they would draw half of the fish symbol in the dirt. If the stranger completed it, they knew they had found a fellow believer who wouldn't report them to the authorities. These early Christians lived radically. They sold their possessions and shared everything in common. They took care of the poor, the sick, and the abandoned. When plagues swept through Roman cities, pagans fled to the countryside, while Christians stayed behind to nurse the dying. They refused to worship the emperor as a god, which Romans saw as treason. They wouldn't serve in the military or attend gladiator games. To the Romans, they seemed like anarchists trying to destroy civilization. But something was growing in those underground meetings. By the year 300, despite centuries of persecution, Christianity had spread throughout the empire. Some estimates suggest that 10% of the Roman Empire was Christian. That's roughly 6 million people willing to die rather than renounce their faith. Then came the most shocking plot twist in religious history. October 28th, 312 AD. Constantine, a Roman general fighting for control of the empire, is preparing for the Battle of Milvian Bridge outside Rome. The night before the battle, he has a vision, or so he claims. He sees a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Constantine orders his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. The next day, he wins a decisive victory that makes him Emperor of Rome. Imagine the Christians' shock. For 3 centuries, they had been hunted, tortured, and killed by Roman soldiers. Now those same soldiers were marching under the banner of the cross. It was as if, overnight, everything had been turned upside down. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity throughout the empire. But he didn't stop there. He began pouring imperial wealth into Christian churches. He commissioned magnificent basilicas, including the original St. Peter's Basilica, built over the apostles' grave. He exempted clergy from taxes and gave them judicial authority. But here's where the story gets complicated, and this is crucial to understanding everything that follows. Constantine wasn't baptized as a Christian until he was on his deathbed. For most of his reign, he continued to serve as the high priest of the pagan sun god, Sol Invictus. He kept pagan symbols on his coins. He delayed his baptism because he believed it would wash away all his sins, and he had a lot more sinning to do as emperor. Many historians believe Constantine's conversion was more political than spiritual. Christians were a significant and growing minority in his empire, and they were incredibly well organized. By allying with them, he gained their loyalty and their organizational structure. But whether his conversion was genuine or calculated, the result was the same: the most dramatic reversal of fortune in religious history. Within a single generation, Christianity went from being illegal to being favored by the state. By 380 AD, under Emperor Theodosius, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Suddenly, being a Christian wasn't just legal, it was politically advantageous. The persecuted had become the persecutors. But this success came with a price that would have horrified those early Christians meeting in secret. As Christianity became the religion of empire, it began to adopt the empire's methods. The church that once refused to violence began launching holy wars. The religion that preached poverty began accumulating vast wealth. The faith that proclaimed equality began creating rigid hierarchies. By the 5th century, the Bishop of Rome, who we now call the Pope, was claiming authority not just over other bishops but over kings and emperors. This was a staggering claim. Jesus had said, "My kingdom is not of this world," but his followers were now claiming dominion over this world in his name. The transformation accelerated in the 8th century when Pope Stephen II made one of history's most audacious power moves. The Byzantine Empire, which considered itself the legitimate heir to Rome, controlled much of Italy. But Stephen had other plans. He traveled north to meet with Pepin the Short, king of the Franks. The Pope made Pepin an offer: "I'll legitimize your rule by crowning you, and you give me political control over central Italy." This was the birth of the Papal States, a political kingdom ruled by the Pope that would last for over 1,000 years. The humble fisherman Peter could never have imagined that his successors would command armies, collect taxes, and execute political prisoners. The church had become everything Jesus warned against: wealthy, powerful, and worldly. Hello there. I'm excited you're here learning with us on Professor Archive, where we dive deep into the most fascinating stories history has to offer. Before we continue with this incredible transformation, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Are you a student cramming for an exam, a history teacher looking for material, or maybe someone who just loves a good story? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you're finding this content valuable, consider leaving a super thanks. It really helps keep these deep dives coming. Now, back to our story, because it's about to get even more shocking. The year 1095. Pope Urban II stands before a crowd at the Council of Clermont in France. He delivers a speech that will launch a series of wars lasting nearly 200 years. "God wills it!" the crowd chants as Urban calls for a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. This is the beginning of the Crusades, a series of military campaigns that would fundamentally change how the world viewed Christianity. The irony was staggering. Jesus had taught his followers to turn the other cheek, to love their enemies, to put away their swords. Yet here was his supposed representative on earth, calling for a war that would kill hundreds of thousands in Christ's name. When the First Crusade captured Jerusalem in 1099, the soldiers slaughtered Muslims, Jews, and even Eastern Christians indiscriminately. A contemporary account describes blood running ankle-deep in the streets. But the Crusades were about more than just religious fervor. They were also about economics and politics. The church was becoming incredibly wealthy from donations, taxes, and land ownership. Crusading offered a way to channel the violent energy of European knights while expanding Christian influence and wealth. Crusaders were promised forgiveness of sins and a share of any treasure they captured. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 revealed just how far the church had strayed from its origins. Instead of heading to the Holy Land, the Crusaders attacked Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, fellow Christians. They looted churches, destroyed irreplaceable artifacts, and divided up the Byzantine territories among themselves. The Pope who had called for this crusade was deeply troubled by the outcome, but he accepted the political benefits anyway. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the church was dealing with another problem: dissent within its own ranks. Christians who dared to question church authority or interpret the Bible differently were labeled heretics. The church's response was swift and brutal: the Inquisition. Starting in the 12th century, church courts with the authority to torture and execute were established throughout Europe. The Spanish Inquisition, launched in 1478, became the most notorious. Under Tomás de Torquemada, thousands were burned at the stake for heresy. Jewish and Muslim converts to Christianity were particular targets, often tortured until they confessed to practicing their old faiths in secret. The methods were horrifying. Suspected heretics were subjected to the rack, which stretched their bodies until joints dislocated. The strappado involved hanging victims by their wrists tied behind their backs. Water torture involved forcing gallons of water down victims' throats. All of this was done in the name of saving souls, with detailed manuals explaining how to extract confessions while keeping victims alive as long as possible. Property seizure was a major motivation. When someone was convicted of heresy, their possessions were divided between the church and the crown. This created a perverse incentive to target wealthy individuals. Entire families could be destroyed by a single accusation, and the accusers often remained anonymous. But perhaps the most shocking transformation was still to come. By the late Middle Ages, the papacy had become a medieval mafia operation. Popes lived in luxury that would make modern billionaires blush. They had multiple mistresses, fathered children openly, and sold church positions to the highest bidder. The practice of selling indulgences, essentially get-out-of-hell-free cards, became so corrupt that people could literally buy their way out of punishment for murder. Pope Alexander VI, who reigned from 1492 to 1503, was perhaps the most scandalous. He bought his way to the papacy through bribery, had at least 7 children with various mistresses, and allegedly poisoned his enemies. His son, Cesare Borgia, became the inspiration for Machiavelli's The Prince. Alexander threw orgies in the Vatican and auctioned off church positions during dinner parties. This corruption reached a breaking point in 1517, when a German monk named Martin Luther nailed 95 theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg. Luther wasn't trying to start a revolution. He just wanted to debate whether the church could sell salvation. But his challenge to papal authority sparked the Protestant Reformation, splitting Christianity into competing factions that would war against each other for centuries. The Catholic Church's response was swift and violent. The Counter-Reformation launched in 1545 included the Roman Inquisition, which burned thousands of Protestants alive. The Index of Forbidden Books banned works by Galileo, Descartes, and countless others. The church that had once preserved learning during the Dark Ages was now actively suppressing knowledge that challenged its authority. Religious wars devastated Europe for over a century. The 30 Years' War alone killed an estimated 8 million people, roughly 1/3 of the population of the Holy Roman Empire. Christians were slaughtering Christians in Jesus' name, while church leaders counted their gold. But here's where our story takes another unexpected turn. The very corruption that sparked the Reformation also sparked a counter-reformation within Catholicism itself. New religious orders like the Jesuits emerged, dedicated to education, missionary work, and spiritual renewal. The Council of Trent reformed many church practices and ended the worst abuses. Simultaneously, Protestant denominations were developing their own problems. Puritan communities in New England burned accused witches. Protestant churches split into hundreds of denominations, each claiming to have the true interpretation of Christianity. The decentralization that Protestants celebrated also led to theological chaos and endless division. The Enlightenment brought new challenges as scientific discoveries contradicted church teachings. When Galileo proved that Earth revolved around the sun, the Inquisition forced him to recant under threat of death. The church that had once been Europe's greatest patron of learning now found itself at war with science itself. The 19th and 20th centuries brought even more dramatic changes. The Pope lost his political kingdom when Italy unified in 1870. Vatican I declared papal infallibility just as the Pope was losing temporal power, a desperate attempt to maintain spiritual authority while political authority crumbled. Two world wars forced Christians to confront uncomfortable questions about their faith's role in civilization. How could a Christian nation like Germany produce the Holocaust? Why were churches often silent in the face of genocide? Some Christians resisted heroically. Dietrich Bonhoeffer died opposing the Nazis, but many others collaborated or remained silent. The sexual revolution of the 1960s created new tensions. While Catholic leaders preached celibacy and opposed birth control, they were secretly covering up widespread sexual abuse by clergy. The scandal that began breaking in the 1980s revealed that thousands of children had been abused by priests, while church hierarchies protected the perpetrators. Meanwhile, Protestant Christianity was experiencing its own transformation through the rise of Pentecostalism and the prosperity gospel. Televangelists began preaching that God wanted believers to be wealthy, healthy, and successful. Multi-million-dollar megachurches sprouted across America, complete with coffee shops, bookstores, and professional-quality concert venues. The contrast became stark. Jesus, who was homeless and owned nothing, being represented by preachers in private jets asking for donations to buy another mansion. Kenneth Copeland, who owns multiple jets, once explained that he needed them to avoid flying with demons in commercial aircraft, meaning regular people. Joel Osteen preaches prosperity theology from a 16,000-seat former basketball arena while living in a $10.5 million mansion. This brings us to today's Christianity, a religion so diverse that it's almost impossible to define. You have Catholic priests taking vows of poverty working alongside Protestant pastors earning millions. You have Christians running soup kitchens, and Christians refusing to bake cakes for gay weddings. You have churches ordaining women and minorities, while others insist on male-only leadership. The global picture is equally complex. While Christianity declines in the West, it's exploding in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The typical Christian today is a woman living in the global South, not a white male in Europe or America. Chinese Christianity is growing so rapidly that China may soon have more Christians than the United States. Some modern churches are returning to the radical simplicity of early Christianity. House churches meet in living rooms, share resources communally, and focus on serving the poor. Others have embraced modern technology and business methods, live streaming services, and using marketing strategies that would make corporations envious. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated many changes, forcing traditional churches online and highlighting the divide between essential services and religious gatherings. Some churches defied lockdown orders in the name of religious freedom, while others innovated new ways to serve their communities safely. But perhaps the most shocking transformation isn't in how churches operate, but in how they're perceived. In many Western countries, Christianity has gone from being the dominant cultural force to being viewed with suspicion or indifference. Scandals, political associations, and cultural conflicts have damaged the church's reputation among younger generations. Yet Christianity continues to evolve and adapt, just as it has for 2,000 years. Progressive churches are ordaining LGBTQ+ clergy and performing same-sex marriages, while conservative churches maintain traditional interpretations. Some denominations are splitting over these issues, while others find ways to maintain unity despite disagreement. The environmental movement has also sparked new theological thinking. Creation care. Theology argues that protecting the environment is a Christian duty, while some others see environmental concerns as distracting from spiritual matters. Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change represents a dramatic shift for an institution that once focused primarily on individual salvation. Social media has democratized religious authority in unprecedented ways. Anyone can start a Christian podcast, YouTube channel, or TikTok account and gather followers. Traditional gatekeepers, bishops, denominational leaders, seminary professors, compete for attention with charismatic individuals who may have no formal training but lots of online savvy. This brings us to perhaps the most profound question in this entire transformation. What would Jesus think of his church today? The carpenter who said it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven might be shocked by prosperity theology. The teacher who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," might struggle with Christianity's history of violence. The healer who welcomed outcasts might question why some churches exclude people based on identity or behavior. But he might also be amazed by Christians running hospitals and schools worldwide, by believers sacrificing their lives to serve the poor, by congregations standing up for justice even when it costs them members and money. The complexity of modern Christianity reflects the complexity of human nature itself, capable of both great good and terrible evil, often simultaneously. The story isn't over. Christianity today faces challenges that would make Constantine's problem seem simple. Secularization, scandals, cultural conflicts, and global competition from other worldviews are reshaping the religious landscape. Some predict Christianity's decline in the West will be permanent. Others see signs of renewal and revival. What's certain is that the religion that began with a homeless carpenter in first-century Palestine has proven remarkably adaptable. It survived Roman persecution, medieval corruption, Protestant division, Enlightenment skepticism, modern scandals, and postmodern indifference. Each crisis has produced both decline and renewal, both corruption and reform. The Church's shocking transformation isn't really one story. It's thousands of stories of individual Christians trying to follow Jesus in their particular time and place. Some succeeded admirably, others failed spectacularly, most fell somewhere in between. The institution has been both a force for tremendous good and a source of terrible harm, sometimes simultaneously. Today's Christianity is more diverse, more global, and more complex than ever before. Whether this represents progress or decline depends on your perspective and priorities. What's undeniable is that the movement Jesus started has outlasted empires, survived scandals, and adapted to countless cultural changes while somehow maintaining its core identity. As we watch Christianity continue to evolve in real time, we're witnessing the latest chapter in one of history's most dramatic institutional transformations. From a persecuted minority to an imperial religion, from medieval power to modern diversity, the Church's journey reveals as much about human nature as it does about divine purpose. The next chapter is being written now, by Christians around the world who are wrestling with age-old questions in new contexts. How do you follow a first-century Jewish carpenter in a 21st-century global culture? How do you maintain ancient truths while engaging modern realities? How do you build an institution that serves divine purposes without falling into human corruption? These questions don't have easy answers, which means the Church's shocking transformation is far from over. The story that began in first-century Palestine continues today wherever Christians gather to worship, serve, and seek to understand what it means to follow Jesus in their particular corner of history. That's a wrap on today's deep dive into one of history's most dramatic transformations. If this content resonated with you and you'd like to support more investigations like this one, I'd be incredibly grateful for a super thanks. Your support helps us continue bringing you these detailed historical explorations. Don't forget to subscribe to Professor Archive if you haven't already. We've got more fascinating stories coming your way. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring the incredible complexity of human history.